First, this is the second West Slope Startup Week in history. So we're very excited, and this is the first time there was a dedicated technology track. And this is the first talk in the tech track. So we're very happy to have Aaron here to kick this whole thing off in terms of the tech aspect of West Slope Startup Week. This West Slope Startup Week is going to be virtual all month long, starting today until the end of the month on the 30th. There are over 70 sessions, and it's all crafted by the local entrepreneurial community, sort of built by all of you for all of you. The goals are to learn from each other, share stories, gain new skills, and connect new friends and connect old friends and meet new friends. Just to reiterate, this session is going to be recorded, so be cognizant of the questions you ask. And on a really important note, I'd like to thank our sponsor. The sponsor for the tech track specifically is CART, based out of Grand Junction. Without them, this wouldn't exist, so thank you so much, CART. And on I think the last note, if anyone has any questions along the way, feel free to use the chat messaging piece of Zoom. I will be on the other end of that trying to help answer your questions or help get those questions to Aaron. But that's the best place to ask questions along the way. Aaron will also have time after his talk to answer questions then. And without further ado, I guess I'd like to introduce Aaron. I don't have a lot to say about him at the moment because he's going to introduce himself. But the bottom line is Aaron has been involved with technology startups for a number of years now, at least 3 that I've read from his roster that have successfully sold. And what you may not know about Aaron from his bio is that he's also been quite involved in the community scene around the Western Slope. So I feel like he's a little bit of a quiet community builder, but nevertheless, you seem to be all over the place when it comes to connecting some of our communities and really trying to push the bar up when it comes to entrepreneurship and technology. So without further ado, Aaron, please take it over.
Yeah, thanks so much, Justin. I had a blast attending the first Startup Week last year in Grand Junction, and excited to attend virtually many of the sessions this year, and I'm super stoked to present this one. So this session will be a management talk with a remote twist, but all the lessons also apply to those who are in person or have in-house teams. But I'll call out the lessons that are particularly applicable to remote managers and teams. I know I initially listed this talk as more story-driven, sharing our paths and our triumphs and our failures. But when I sat down to make the slides, I realized that talk would take way more than an hour, especially how much I talk. So I decided to jump to the back of the book and just kind of focus on the answers in the back, providing actionable tips that you can just walk away from this talk with new tools in your toolbox right away. And also, just as a heads up, so that I can be engaged in the Zoom chat and look at my speaker notes, I do have another computer screen going over here. So if I keep looking to my right, I'm not being stalked or threatened or anything. It's just where my other notes are. And as Justin said, yeah, feel free to leave comments right in the Zoom chat window. You can open it up with the icon on the bottom of the screen or by pushing Alt-H. All right, so this is a management talk, but like, what does that even mean? What is management? So I like Julie's definition. Julie Zhu is a co-founder at Inspirit, which she started after she was the vice president of product design at Facebook. And she rose to that position from being an entry-level designer there and chronicled that tale in her book, The Making of a Manager, which is where I stole this quote from, which is basically your job as a manager is to get better outcomes from a group of people working together. Easy, right? No, actually it's hard. Management is hard. And then remote management is even harder. So here in this photo is Uray, Colorado local, Chad Jukes. He's an outdoorsman who lost his leg in an IED explosion in Iraq, but yet years later he summited Everest. And I often use the analogy of Everest to remote management is leading remotely is like summiting Everest with just one leg. It's the same mountain as the non-remote managers or the able-bodied climbers. And you can do it, you can climb it, but you need to work a little harder. You want to play to your strengths, avoid things that might be particularly tough to disadvantages. but it is possible and very doable. So the goal of this presentation is just to add tools to your toolbox. Like I said, there is no management silver bullet, and thus there is no remote management silver bullet. So my goal is to just kind of give you as many lessons as I learned as possible, with the hope that some of them will work for you. And so who's this person presenting anyways? Like who am I? Who's this guy who's talking, Aaron? Yeah, so my name is Aaron. I'm currently the head of the 38-person engineering team at the stock media startup Storyblocks. I live in beautiful Ouray, Colorado, which is in the southwest part of Colorado. And Storyblocks is headquartered in DC. Now, normally about 10% of the employees, including myself, are remote. Although given COVID-19 right now, everyone has been remote for a few months now. Stock media is canned videos, images, and audio for use in derivative creative works you're making. For example, if you're making a commercial and you want a 5-second shot of the Taj Mahal, you're not gonna pay to fly a film crew out to India to shoot it for a few seconds and then fly them back. Someone's already has that shot. So you're just gonna spend like $80.
Is it just me, or did we just lose our speaker?
He did say he was in Ouray.
Yeah. I'm sure I'll be back on in a minute.
Hey everyone, looks like Ouray's fiber is usually pretty good, but of course they're waiting for the one time that I have to present. So I can share my screen again, hop back right into it. What was the last thing you heard, Justin?
Someone else is gonna have to answer that. I was responding to a message.
Okay.
Paying $80 for a picture when you don't have to go over there.
All right. Yeah, so if you're paying $80 for a picture or an audio clip, it adds up pretty quickly and prices out a lot of the lower budget creators, people with YouTube channels or small ad agencies. So we're the first subscription-based stock media company where you pay a flat fee, monthly or annual, and you have unlimited downloads from our library, kind of similar to Spotify, we share with the revenue as well. So that's kind of stock media in a nutshell. Now, I joined Storyblocks 7 years ago. It was actually called Video Blocks at the time. And then we hired a consulting company out of California. We did tons of interviews, a lot of work. And afterwards, we came up with our new name, Storyblocks. But it's actually a good name. We help people tell their digital stories. And originally we were Video Blocks. So I joined Video Blocks 7 years ago as a third programmer, right after their Series A round. And then since then, we raised a Series B, kept growing, and then we're most recently acquired into the portfolio of the private equity firm Great Hills Partners. We were profitable, so why did we go for sale? Well, Great Hills is very growth oriented, and we believe their partnership will help us accelerate our long-term plans. So basically, when I joined the company-wide, we were under 20 people, and now we're 120 and counting. And yes, we are hiring. I've been involved with startups for a long time, ever since graduating the University of Maryland in 2007 with a dual degree in computer engineering and marketing. I was first to engineer at retail analytics startup Applied Predictive Technologies, or APT, and they went on to be acquired by MasterCard. And then I was at an energy efficiency startup called OPower, and they went on to be acquired by Oracle. Along the way, I founded an online drawing community called Doodle or Die after winning a Node.js programming contest. On that platform, over 20 million drawings and descriptions have been created by hundreds of thousands of users, but it never actually paid the bills. But it did make some money, which I used to sponsor some of the Western Colorado's first startup weekends, like Telluride, Aspen, etc. So that's, I'm not billing myself, I'm no guru, I'm not like a thought leader with a book or a blog. But the Storyblocks engineering team does have an 86% retention rate, which is pretty good for software engineering. It's grown from 3 to almost 40 team members and has done a great job rapidly shipping robust features that have driven the fantastic company growth and recent exit. So I consider myself at least an okay manager. And with my tools, I hope you will be at least an okay manager as well, if not better. So I didn't accidentally leave the watermark on this background here. I intentionally, shamelessly promoting the breadth of Storyblocks library with some of my slides here. So here, we talk about management, but what about like software engineering management specifically? I think you can kind of narrow it down to 2 things, which is recruit, retain, and develop top talent, and then ship stuff, which is basically releasing the right stuff at the right time. So for my lessons learned, I'm gonna break it into 4 main sections, which is recruiting talent, retaining talent, developing talent, and then of course, shipping. All right, so recruiting talent kind of go in the order of a candidate's life cycle, and that starts with the first round interview. So my first tip is probably controversial here, but it's to be the first round interviewer as much as possible. So as a manager, you're likely on the manager's schedule where you're jumping from meeting to meeting, and a 30 to 60-minute interview won't be much of a distraction. However, most engineers are on the making schedule where they have a few meetings and then periods of deep work where they actually get stuff done. And meetings and interviews can result in Swiss cheese on their calendar where they have kind of meetings sprinkled throughout the day. And that's the bane of most engineers' existence. Context switching costs are real. So my advice is to take one for the team and try to do as much of the first round interviewing as possible. Besides showing your team there are other benefits, I found that candidates really like that they're talking to the head of engineering in their first call. It shows that the head of engineering will be accessible and we care about connecting with all the team members. And it does give you a connection to that candidate for later communication and a good starting point should they join. This background is Ouray, Colorado. Besides shamelessly promoting Storyblocks, I'm also going to highlight my region of Colorado during this talk. And the tip here is to interview during unusual hours. Maybe not during the fireworks display of July 4th, but you can do it before or after normal working hours. Interviewing, if you're a candidate looking for a job, interviewing while you're at work really stinks. You have to make a cryptic meeting on your calendar to protect the time. You need to find a space to take the call, which could be like an office room or a car or like a park or somewhere. And so a lot of candidates have actually appreciated when I offered hey, happy to do a call after business hours. And if you have a time zone advantage from working remotely, even better. And being in Colorado, I often have such an advantage where 4 p.m. my time is 6 p.m. Eastern time, for example. So offering to interview during unusual hours has gotten a lot of interviews quicker than if I was trying to keep it within the business hours. And then when you are interviewing, remember the interviews are bi-directional. Be sure to sell your company. The candidate is evaluating you while you're evaluating them. And so what I like to do is weave in fun facts about the company during the call. I might say hey, why are you looking for a new job? And they'll say that they weren't learning and growing the way that they want. And I'll talk about how, we have a mentor program and we try to have this 20% time or level up time and stuff. I also try to sneak in some third-party validation by mentioning how we've won Coolest Company Awards or Washingtonian's Best Places to Work. So be sure you're also selling your company during the call. All right, this is a photo of the Grand Mesa right outside Grand Junction. And I'm using it to present perhaps one of my most controversial tips here, but it's one I swear by. And that is when you're giving a candidate an offer, allow them to finish other in-flight processes because they're probably interviewing with other companies. The way I phrase it is we want a candidate to accept a job at Storyblocks because they truly believe it's the best fit and not due to high-pressure sales tactics like exploding offers. And so while we might lose some candidates that we wouldn't have, I think we would have lost those candidates later anyways if they decided on Storyblocks because time was running out as opposed to they've done a full evaluation, decided we're the best fit. So I think this tip does greatly increase retention and fosters goodwill right from the get-go with candidates. All right, once your candidate joins, they have a really valuable perspective. And that's they haven't been brainwashed yet by your company. They're not drinking your Kool-Aid. So what I do as soon as a candidate joins is schedule a meeting at the 1 month and 2 month marks where we just sit down and we talk about everything that seems strange to them. Like what's weird, what's bad, or what are some things that we're not doing that we should consider doing? What are some stuff that has been done at your past companies that could work well here? So we've gotten a lot of great ideas from brand new, newly hired people. Make sure you tap into them. Eventually they will become brainwashed and start drinking your Kool-Aid. So get them early. All right, that was a smattering of tips from the recruiting side. Now we'll move on to retaining. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'll just keep on moving here. So this first tip is probably not new. It's very common. It's just to leverage one-on-ones. The first companies I worked at didn't have one-on-ones really. Storyblocks was the first company that did them, but I really like them, and I can see why they're becoming really popular like across the board and throughout the industry. So for those who don't know, one-on-ones is basically a meeting with you, the manager, and just one other person. Mine are typically 30 minutes and broken into 3 parts. The first part is non-work related talk. That's just getting to know the person. It's really important when you're remote or they're remote because you're not going to bump into them at the water cooler or at a happy hour. So having dedicated time just to know them as a human is really important. The next part I like to ask, like, what are you working on right this second and how's that going? It just provides like a window into the day-to-day of some of your team and keeps you more connected. And then the last third of the meeting is usually bigger picture, just like how things are going in general. And I have some other questions there I'll share in a second. So overall, I have about 50 recurring one-on-ones of varying frequencies, some as often as every week, some as infrequently as every quarter. I have a one-on-one with every single engineer on the team, so all other 37 people. And then I also have one-on-ones with like the head of sales, designers, customer service person, and of course my boss, the CEO as well. Overall, it probably takes about 8 to 10 hours a week I spend in one-on-ones, or about 20% of my time, but it is time very well spent. I wouldn't give it up for anything else. Oh, and this is a climbing crag in Uray for the rock climbers out there. It's very convenient, right off the road, picnic tables, it's great. All right, this is my favorite tip in the whole presentation. I want to write a whole blog post about it. But basically, give your one-on-ones absurd names based on the interest of the person you're meeting with. So whenever I'm first scheduling a one-on-one, I ask the person, hey, what are a few of your favorite things? And I take their answer and combine it into a fun meeting name. And one, this saves your calendar from boring meeting names like, you know, Aaron, Jessica Stink, or like Aaron, Roger, Check-in. You get these great meeting names, so that adds a little excitement. Also, you quickly learn, you memorize them, you learn the interests. So now I know the top 3 or 4 interests of every single person on my team and some people not on my team. And this is a great jumping off point for the beginning of the call when you're just trying to talk about non-work stuff and getting to know them. So yeah, even though I'm totally remote, I know the top interests of more than 40 people at my company using this trick. All right, so I mentioned that part of my one-on-one is I zoom out and talk big picture. There are 2 questions that I really like to ask for this. And the first is, what is the worst part of your job? I love this question. I ask it in every one-on-one. Now, sometimes people will be hesitant to give you a real answer. They'll say like, oh, everything's great, or like nothing's bad. So you might have to dig, but there always is something. There always is a worst part of their job. I found that if people don't like have anything on top of their head, if I just start listing things that upset me, then they'll come with ideas. So I'll be like, really? Like today, like I had too many meetings, or the slow tests were annoying or whatever. And then the person you're talking to relaxes and opens up. This question's even more powerful when you're remote because you get a lot more signal and less noise. It's kind of like how grandparents notice their grandchildren growing because they kind of see them periodically, where parents might not notice the change. Is if you're asking people what the worst part of their job is every one-on-one across the company, you get like a really good vision into like what's annoying one person or what's annoying the whole team, or what is a festering problem, what problem might be solving on its own. One example at Storyblocks is the answer for many engineers to this question was slow end-to-end tests. So we have a bunch of end-to-end tests that simulate user using the browser, uses a tool called Selenium, and it clicks and uses our product to make sure we didn't break anything. And back then, test times were 45 minutes, which is like the perfect amount of time that you can't really get anything else done, but it's still super annoying to wait for test results. And this is really bothering engineers. So we came out with our own project. We called it Project Bannister, named after the runner who broke the seemingly impossible barrier of the 4-minute mile. The project was to speed up our test. And when we didn't get our test to run under 4 minutes, we did reduce the testing time from 45 to 7 minutes. And we track metrics, which is a later tip. It basically doubled engineering productivity by reducing tests there. And had I not been asking this to every single person all the time, the slow test might have just seemed like kind of a one-off annoyance or a problem that comes here and there. But it was really easy to hone in on this as like a high impact way to spend my energy by asking this question every time. All right, the other question I like to ask every time is, are you learning and growing the way that you want? And I ask this because the top reason engineers leave a company is that they feel they are not learning and growing the way they want. So it's much better to know the answer to this is no in a one-on-one than when an engineer or any employee is quitting. Other reasons engineers leave, I did screenshot a tweet. This is one of my more popular tweets here, is they feel unfairly treated or assessed or disrespected or undervalued. But by far, the main reasons are not learning and growing the way they want. In fact, I do all my first round interviews, as my earlier tip suggests. I always ask, like, hey, why are you looking for a new job? And anecdotally, probably 3 out of 4 times, the answer is they're not learning or growing the way they want. So just ask it, just hit it straight on. Just ask people this every time. And if the answer is no, you got to do something about it. So take action and factor team growth into decisions you make. In general, we try our best to match interests and business needs. If someone's on a team or project that doesn't interest them, we try not to let that happen for too long. If we can't move them right away, we at least want light at the end of the tunnel, saying, hey, let's finish this up and we'll try to move you next quarter. One story that I like is back in the day, we were mostly using Angular as our front-end framework. And we heard whispers and rumors of this new technology called React. We had to redo the front end of one part of our product. And if we did it in Angular, it'd probably take like 2 or 3 weeks. And doing it in React would probably double the time because no one knew how React works. So the end customer wouldn't notice anything different. It'd just take us a lot longer to do it. It seems like a bad decision to make. But we placed value on the fact that our team and our engineers would learn React and factor that into the calculus of the decision and made the call to do that refactor using this new technology. And in this case, after we did it, the programmers working on it and the team really liked that technology. It's become our go-to front-end framework. And this photo, by the way, speaking of growth, is Ure's brand new open this year via Ferrata, where you can clip in and traverse all over cliffs. All right, one thing that is super important, especially when the whole team is remote, is to celebrate wins, both small and large. And celebration doesn't have to be like a crazy party or in a hotel or a party bus or anything like that. You can start simple with even just company-wide Slack announcements. So here are 2 examples where we celebrate. Here we just celebrate the launch of like a feature, pretty small win, but it's great to celebrate. And then another one is a larger milestone, which is when we our kind of newly formed enterprise team passed $1 million in sales much earlier in the year than they had the year before. One thing that helps enable Slack celebrations is a good GIF integration. Lots of GIFs add to the celebratory mood. So if you don't have like a GIF integration or something like that, I highly recommend you add it. Also, expanding Slack's base set of emojis is very critical. We have like dancing parrots and like amazed faces and our Storyblocks logo, of course. And so pretty soon the company culture will congeal around certain emojis and stuff, and you'll have these great Slack celebrations. Speaking of Slack, we actually use it a lot. I'm a big fan of the phrase like habit hijacking. People don't want to be tabbing through a whole bunch of different apps and windows. While most people, especially those who are remote, are in Slack nearly all the time. So we use Slack bots all over the place. 2 examples here are ways we give kind of a window into the customer and our processes. So on the left is a bot that pastes every NPS survey we get. In this case, it's a not very favorable NPS comment. It's a rating of 5 out of 10. And then you can see there's people replying, like engaging there. And so by having Slack bots post NPS, you have people who might not be as plugged into the customers, looking and gaining a better idea and having a better customer mindset. Another example here is a bot we have hooked into Salesforce. So anytime a deal is closed, or actually when a deal is like open or a pitch or whatever, it gets posted into a channel. So you can also kind of get an idea of the enterprise pipeline without being on our enterprise or B2B teams. Slack can also just be for fun. So with everyone remote, there's no like wall of quotes or quote board, but we have a virtual one. So we have a robot that's called FooBot, which is the combination of fun and bot. Very creative, I know. And we can tell this robot to store quotes and attribute them to people. And then later we can retrieve quotes. And so anytime someone says something silly, the more out of context, the better. We tell the robot to remember it. And then throughout the day, people will randomly ask the robot for quotes. And you can do other fun stuff as well. Here we superimpose the quote over like a random stock image because we are a stock media company. And it's just little things like this can really break up the monotony of the workday and kind of liven things up. All right, and lastly, we really do put our bots to work. They actually do our deploying and monitoring as well. So the way we deploy production is we add ourselves to this kind of merge queue and then merge our pull request. Updates are sent in Slack in real time, both in terms of automated test passing and then like a rolling deploy. We use Elastic Container Service generally. And then when it's done, the bot will move on to like the next person is waiting to deploy. So our deploy bot is named Doris after the Simpsons character, and we interact with her several times a day. We deploy multiple times a day. And if something bad happens, different bots will let us know. We have a Wasabi is hurtin' bot. Wasabi is kind of the code name we use for our contributor portal, and that will let us know if we're having issues there. And what I love about this bot in this example is it also provides like a starting place for resolution. Like, hey, something's wrong, and here's some steps you can do to check. So you're kind of almost combining like alerting and a wiki in one there. Some of our other alerts do just link to like a wiki page. And then New Relic as well is another great tool, which I'll talk about later, and that's integrated as well. So put your Slack bots to work, hijack habits. Everyone's in Slack, so we like to push the information to Slack. All right, and even though everyone's remote right now, getting together in person is still very important. If your company is primarily not remote, and you are, try to travel to the office every now and then. When you do, make the most of it. So when I go to the Storyblocks office, I try to grab like acai bowls for breakfast with coworkers, go out to lunch, happy hours, dinners, evening activities. You're kind of constantly on. It's exhausting, but it's worth it. And actually, most of the time, I usually crash on the couch of my team members as well, which not only saves the company money, but then allows like further interaction, whiskey, etc. And if you're not remote or your company's fully remote, like in-person offsites are very useful. At Storyblocks, we do entire company offsite once a year, and then each department does an offsite once a year. So basically every 6 months, the engineering team is getting out of the office and going somewhere else to just get to know each other better and also talk long-term strategy. And these have always exceeded my expectations when it comes to relationship building and strategic conversations. There is something magical about getting out of the office. It doesn't have to be expensive. On the left, our whole company went to like a hotel and a resort that was during the off season, basically. And we had a costume party. So we essentially like brought our own festiveness there. This one was 80s themed. That's why you see a Rubik's Cube, and I'm there as the Karate Kid. Our engineering offsites, generally our formula is just to rent 1 or 2 giant houses on Airbnb or VRBO, go shopping at Costco together, and then cook the meals together. And the cooking the meals together is almost everyone's favorite part, and it saves a ton of money when it comes to eating out. And then, of course, every good offsite should have a campfire discussion. All right, so that's the retaining talent piece. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'll just go ahead and keep going along to the next part of my tips, which is developing talent. So the next 2 slides might be the most important on a culture front. In fact, they form the basis of a 90-minute training that we've done at Storyblocks. So I'm only gonna touch on things that are really high level, but if you wanna dive in deeper to like any tips in this presentation, these next 2 slides are where you'll want to dive. So the first tip is to foster a culture that has autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Autonomy is fulfilling the desire to be self-directed, giving people autonomous. Mastery is the desire to get better. People are improving, learning and growing, like we talked about. And then purpose is what they're doing has meaning, you know, connecting the kind of the celebration part, connecting work to company goals and achievements. So AMP was coined by Daniel Pink, who wrote the book Drive when he was trying to figure out what motivates people. And his book starts off talking about what he calls the candle problem. So the way the candle problem works is you give someone a box of tacks, a candle, and some matches and tell them to light the candle and affix it so it won't drip wax on the table. And they have to make like one logical kind of creative leap in that the box doesn't just hold the tacks, but it can be part of the solution. And so that's kind of like an indirect solution. And then they also repeat the problem where they leave the tacks out of the box. So it's like really obvious the box is a tool. And they would pay people to get this done faster. And they found that in the situation where it's obvious what to do on that kind of rightmost candle problem, paying people did improve performance a little bit. But on the left, it actually slowed them down. Is by offering money, you didn't get any more productivity. And they expanded this to like much more intricate experiments, and it kind of held true. And kind of one big example right now is Wikipedia. Like who would have thought a encyclopedia made by unpaid contributors would be a much better information source than World Book or Encyclopedia or these kind of powerhouses that pay people. And it's because for those who are doing creative work, which I imagine is most of your employees, money helps with retention. You know, you need to pay people a fair wage. But like, if you want more productivity, you can't just throw more money at them. You gotta do something else. And that something else is foster a culture of autonomy, mastery, and purpose. The other element to a great culture is something called psychological safety. So this term came out of a Google study called Project Oxygen. Google is very inquisitive and likes to try to figure out what works, what doesn't, et cetera. And so they launched this huge initiative to try to figure out what makes high-performing teams. And they measured a zillion different things, but the metric they found correlated the most was if you measured how long each person talked in that team, the teams with more equal speaking times were the teams that performed better. So then they went to go try to figure out, okay, well, what leads to teams that speak more equally? And they realized that in those teams, people were not afraid of talking. They could communicate fearlessly. There was kind of no stupid questions. And the people who talked a lot were conscious about kind of yielding the floor to those who might not be as loquacious. And they called those elements like psychological safety, like people felt safe talking in the team. And if you have a team with psychological safety, you can really leverage the collective, you can best leverage the collective intelligence of your team. So autonomy, mastery, and purpose, and psychological safety, these are by far the two most important things to building a culture, remote or not. All right, so when you are remote, getting equal speaking time can be harder. This is a Zoom meeting. I'm sure many of you are in meetings like this all the time. This particular Storyblocks Zoom meeting was Tiger King themed. And so when you're having a meeting, you're looking at a Zoom screen like this. If you're the meeting leader and you want everyone to participate, there's kind of two tools. There's more, but there's two tools that we like to use. One is a round robin, where you just say ahead of time, hey, we're gonna do a round robin. Everyone's gonna get a chance to talk. We're gonna go in the order of people appear on my screen, and then you kind of have to annotate who's coming up next, because people's orders might be different on their screens. So you might say like, Alice, you're up first, and then Ben, you're next. And then after each person, you say like who's up and who's next on deck. If you really need people to pay attention, you can do a popcorn style. And that's where you pick someone to talk, and then they're gonna pick the next person to talk. So now everyone kind of has to be on guard the whole time, and they need to pay attention so they know like who's spoken and who hasn't. So for meetings that need to be really interactive and you don't want distractions, feel free to leverage the popcorn tactic. So how did we come up with these ideas? Well, Storyblocks like to do what I call as A/B testing process. It's pretty funny that companies will expend a lot of effort in testing things out in their product. Like what happens if we make this button green? What happens if we raise the price by 10%? And they'll always be experimenting, different ads on Facebook, different Google keywords. But then when it comes to how they actually run their company behind the scenes, they'll just do things the same way because they've always done it that way and it works. So you should be A/B testing inside as well. Try new things. The worst case is it doesn't work and you go back to how you were doing it. But in general, you will find new things that work for you, like popcorn Zoom meetings. and continuously improve. So this is one kind of buzzword that I love, Kaizen. It's the Japanese word for continuous improvement. And you can do this by A/B testing process. And as you can tell from this background photo, Ouray has a fantastic trail network. So I recommend you come here and go for a hike one day. So when you try out new things, sometimes it won't work so well. And the important part here is to foster a culture where experimentation and risk-taking is okay. And when failures happen, you're not trying to do a blame game, you're trying to point the finger, you're trying to learn and then move on. So we don't want to encourage burying failures. We want to encourage learning from them. And the good way to do that is with blameless retros. Sometimes even if things went well, it's good to evaluate it. So we'll call those sometimes after action reviews based on the military. Be retrospective and just seek to learn. This is also part of the Kaizen continuous improvement mindset. And this photo is a Jeep that rolled on Black Bear Pass, which is a Jeep road between Ouray and Telluride. And so hopefully this driver does a retrospective and get some lessons learned for next time he or she attempts to drive in the backcountry. So on the risk-taking, encouraging, and learning from failures front, one tool that's worked really well at Storyblocks is something we call Tales from the Trenches. This is a section of our monthly engineering all-hands meeting. So every single engineer gets together and we meet once a month and talk about different things, how the business is doing, what teams are working on. And then of course we share some tales from the trenches. So this is an idea we stole from other activities that have a level of risk that is being managed. Aviation and climbing are two examples there. Aviation publishes accident reports. The American Alpine Club publishes accident reports. And the point of these journals is so that you can learn from the misfortunes of others without having to experience them yourself. And that happens in software a lot. In fact, just in February, I crashed production for several hours. Myself, head of engineering, I crashed production. And I shared it. I shared, what happened. I got a little cowboy with AWS permissions, and then our auto scaling groups couldn't scale up, and the servers crushed under the load. And often our tales are shared by more senior experienced engineers, and it shows like, hey, we still make mistakes. It's okay. It's part of software development. Here's the lessons learned. Let's move on. So be vulnerable. Have a time where you share failures. It's okay. All right, so in the previous slide, that tip I borrowed from aviation and rock climbing. Borrowing from outside your company is a tip itself. Scaffolding is one of my favorite leadership buzzwords. So in construction, scaffolding is basically when you build a secondary building around the building you're trying to build to help it grow. So here there's a skyscraper being built, and they got some cranes and like some wooden planks and stuff going on there. And you should do the same as a leader. Oftentimes the best answers or course of actions is not within you, or might not even come from within your organization. So get out and have ways to import knowledge from outside. Books are great. Audiobooks are great too. If you live in Western Colorado, you probably spend a lot of time driving, even just to the grocery store. I've read many books between Ouray and Montrose, or Ouray and Telluride. Coaching is also an underutilized resource. Nearly everybody can benefit from a coach. Even Usain Bolt has a coach, right? He's a running coach. So for the past 2 years, I've been meeting with twice a month with Jason Wong. He's an engineering coach specialized in the topics of diversity and inclusion, and he's been an invaluable resource. We've also had engineers go to one-time leadership workshops run by Laura Hogan, another expert in the diversity, inclusion, and engineering leadership space. So I highly recommend it. It's well worth the time and money. If Usain Bolt benefits from a coach, you probably will too. In fact, talking about scaffolding, meetups are also good. Conferences in the keynote session of West Slope Startup Week earlier today, both Connie of Marble Distilling and Jamie of the Greater Colorado Venture Fund touted the value of getting out of the trenches and talking to others, hearing what they're experiencing and how they're growing, how they're dealing with problems. So I'll talk a little bit more about conferences soon, but scaffold yourself, scaffold your team, scaffold your company, get ideas from the outside. When you get these ideas, you generally want to share them. And one way we've found is to do lightning talks. So we do lightning talks on the engineering team about every couple of weeks or every month. The topics don't have to be engineering related, although usually they are. But even if they're not engineering related, there's still value in giving every team member a chance to prepare and present something. One of my favorite presentations, we had an analytics team member talk about how to paint like Bob Ross, for example. But in general, lightning talks have included like cool features worked on lately, or something that someone learned in like a conference they attended recently. So think about doing your own internal lightning talks, and I bet people will find them useful and fun. And so I mentioned conferences earlier. My tip here is to send people to conferences in groups. So yeah, conferences, they're a great form of scaffolding. And nowadays the material, is generally available online and talks are recorded. So like, why even go? Well, one, it's a commitment device to focus your attention like on the topic at hand for a day or two. And then by having another coworker there, you get an instant sounding board for each person on bouncing newly formed ideas around. And then also, especially for remote employees, conferences provide like a good time to hang out and build relationships with other employees, kind of like a mini offsite. So at Storyblocks, when people go to conferences, we usually want them to bring a friend. We want at least two. And we also ask them to then work together to prepare and present a lightning talk of the key takeaways and recommendations from Storyblocks. That kind of goes back to the previous one of how we then spread out that knowledge that we learned at conferences. All right, so we have this talent. We've recruited good talent, retained them, developing them. But what's the point of having a bunch of programmers and supporting team members if you can't actually ship stuff? So shipping is a big part of engineering management, and it's the last section here. So my first tip is to lead from the trenches. Of course, I had to sneak in a Lord of the Rings image somewhere in here. But basically, as you get into management, people get further and further away from the code, but just try to still like dabble. You don't have to be shipping features or contributing as much as the rest of your team, but try to get something done like every now and then, at least, to stay technically sharp and connect you more to the day-to-day of your team. Then you get the first-hand experience. Like, yeah, man, tests really are slow. Like, we got to do something about that. Or how come my pull request, no one's commenting on it? Like, it's good to get that first-hand experience to help you lead. And then by staying sharp, you can be a helpful contributor. You can contribute to pull requests or design reviews and pair with newly hired people. You have an understanding of what's going on, help people get unstuck. And then that understanding will help you in the higher level meetings. So when you're back in the management team meetings, people are asking, hey, like, why is this thing taking so long, or what should we do next? You can speak intelligently at all levels. In fact, during our recent acquisition, the acquiring companies were undergoing technical due diligence, where they want to make sure the engineering team that they would acquire is good. It doesn't have a lot of skeletons in the closet. And the company they hired to do due diligence on us was really impressed that myself and another engineering vice president could personally answer almost every question they had, could give a tour of the code base. Like you could tell they knew that having leaders in the trenches was extremely valuable. Now, by leading the trenches, it doesn't mean micromanage. In fact, you should do the opposite. You should involve engineers at the problem level. You don't want a team of code monkeys. And this helps for like the autonomy as well as mastery and purpose that we talked about earlier. So this graph was stolen from Spotify that uses the squad model. We actually use a modified version at Storyblocks, where we say, hey, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Like figure out the best way to do this. Work with the product manager, work with designers. But we're not just going to hand you a list of tickets. We're going to hand you a problem, and then that will naturally become a list of tickets. So the goal here is we want high alignment and high autonomy. And when you have these autonomous teams, one thing you want to be sure they can do is make what we call 80-20 trade-offs. So on my first performance review I ever got as a software engineer, one of my development opportunities was to make better 80-20 trade-offs. So I had this problem of like really diving into a problem and like not coming up for air and spending way too long on it. The 80-20 rule, which is also known as the Pareto principle, Pareto is an economist who realized that power law distributions are often at play in economic situations. So for example, he first realized in Italy that 80% of the land is owned by 20% of the population. Then later on, people realized, wow, like 80% of our company's revenue comes from 20% of customers, et cetera. And so the same thing happens with software development. is in general, 80% of the value can come from 20% of the effort. Then you're spending the remaining 80% of the effort to like just add that polish or get that remaining 20. Sometimes it's worth it. Most of the time it's not. And if you can train and coach your team to have an eye for these 80-20 trade-offs and think about what's like the optimal level of effort to put into this task, then you can have a great, highly aligned autonomous team. So they're making the right trade-offs without you. All right. Another thing we talk about Storyblocks is the bus factor. So the bus factor is how many engineers could get hit by a bus before you're screwed. And that's a little morbid. So you can also think of this as the vacation factor, which is how many engineers can go on vacation and you'll still be okay. And that's more positive. But basically, Murphy's Law would dictate that something will break when the one person who knows about it is off the grid. And this has happened to us. We had kind of only one person who understood our billing system. And then while he was on the beach, there was like a scripted fraud attack from China. And we had to call him when he had to open his laptop up on the beach. So upping the bus factor is important. You want to de-risk as a manager, always trying to de-risk. So you want to protect yourself and have a high bus factor. And one of the best ways to do this is just to really be diligent about pull requests and design reviews. So pull requests is when you're trying to submit code changes to your repository. You have other engineers look at it and they have to explicitly approve it or reject it with feedback suggestions. And so we try to have every line of code pull requested and peer reviewed at Storyblocks. Now, the code changes it's good for like talking about small things, but it's not the best place to catch or discuss like a huge architectural decision. So for medium to large features, we like to do design reviews. And those generally take the form of Google Docs, or sometimes they could just be like a Notion note or something else. And design reviews, we broadcast to the team. We have a channel where, hey, here's a new design review. Here's kind of deadline I need feedback by. Here are the people I want contributing. And that way people can add their thoughts and ideas before a line of code is written, which is a much better time for some of the bigger picture stuff. And if you as a manager are involved in some pull requests, and I try to be involved in every single design review, you're helping up the bus factor yourself and you have a better idea of what is going on. These also serve as a great vehicle to level up the team. Programmers will see different ways to do things. Newer engineers will see how more senior engineers like architect systems. It's a great way to have people kind of level up their skills quicker as well. And then speaking of pull requests, on our pull requests, you can add a checklist. So we have a saying at Storyblocks, which is that checklists save lives. We have a pretty small checklist for pull requests, but anything that you're kind of counting on people to remember or want them to think about when they're merging code, just add it into the GitHub template. And then for bigger things, like maybe a big infrastructure change, and the right example, I think we were changing out a database or changing our servers from running on Heroku to Amazon's Elastic Container Service. We created this whole checklist ahead of time. And that even just the process of creating the checklist helps you kind of think through the like loose ends and like random things you're gonna have to deal with. And then when you're actually going through the motion of that big infrastructure change, the checklist makes sure those things don't fall through the cracks or slip off the plate. So just like in aviation and medicine, checklists save lives. Another thing that can save lives are automated tests. We have a saying that if it's not tested, it's broken. We've found that if something isn't tested with an automated test more specifically, it probably will at some time break. And that can be okay. Like if your terms of service page is broken for a few hours or your FAQ page, like no big deal. But some parts of your product might be more important, like the ability to log in or sign up or pay you money. So if there are things that are bad if it's broken, make sure there's tests. It is so tempting, especially if you're running behind, to skip the tests or tell you like, oh, I'll write these tests later. Resist that temptation. I'm sure every code base has a gazillion to-dos that if you get annotated, they're years old, and that's what will happen with tests. So when you're working with product or QA or other stakeholders, like be sure to just let them know, hey, we can not write tests, but then it will break. You gotta be comfortable with that. So if it's not tested, it's broken. But even if you write tests, things will break. So one thing we do at Storyblocks is invest heavily in tooling. You are not the only software company that wants to run automated tests or monitor server health or aggregate logs. Almost every company wants to do this. So the good news is you don't have to build it. There's companies that can do this for you, and you should let them. Just like car companies generally don't make tires and airplane companies don't make their engines, leave the specialization to someone else so that you can focus on building what's unique to your business. The price tags of some of these tools can be off-putting at first, but when you compare them to the engineering hours that you'll save, it's almost always worth it. So in this case, top left is a tool called New Relic, which we use to monitor server health and alert the team if something's wrong. The top right is a tool that runs a unit test, Circle CI. It's great. Bottom right is two tools, Logly for logs, and then Kibana, which is our telemetry dashboard. But we might be moving our logs to kind of the Elk stack there. A lot of great tools out there. Now, sometimes you will exceed the capabilities of your tools, and that's what bottom left is. So for end-to-end Selenium tests, if you remember, the worst part of people's jobs was the tests were too slow. So we decided to build our own tool that could run them faster. And so we called that CI blocks. So there, the investment wasn't so much as money as engineering time, but still well worth it. So invest in tools. But when you invest in tools, don't let them ruin your life. So you want to avoid what's called alarm fatigue. The best way to do this as a manager is to hook up all the tools to alert you first. For example, when we rolled out paging at our company through a tool called PagerDuty, I had it plugged into just my phone number first. And I got paged all the time, and it was terrible. But that way I could tweak the settings and get it to a reasonable level before you unleash it on the rest of the team. And then that way they weren't burned out on alarm fatigue, and it was more actionable. And also, if you're monitoring, it's good to track metrics. This is my kind of my last tip here. In management in general, some people say you are what you measure. And other departments have been measuring stuff for centuries. Marketing has lifetime value and return on customer acquisition cost. Sales has like leads and pitches, average contract value. But engineering, usually it's just like dev stuff, and then hopefully you're making money and making the right calls. But there are metrics you can track for engineering. In fact, at Storyblocks, we track about 40 metrics every month. Then we summarize these in what we call our engineering metrics report card that we share at our all hands meeting. Our metrics span many categories. We have productivity metrics like median time pull requests sit open before they're merged, or how many commenters are engaging. We have user experience metrics like page speed or errors per user day. The errors per user day metric is one that I've carried with me from my days at APT. And basically the premise is that 1,000 users hitting one error is worse than one user hitting 1,000 errors. So error rate isn't too useful, but errors per user day is what percentage of users encounter one or more errors. What percentage of users have a non-zero amount of errors? So that's been a metric we really like. We track cost metrics like AWS's S3 and EC2 spend. We track engineering team responsiveness to bugs. Like we have a kind of an agreement to respond to critical bugs within 4 hours, high priority bugs within 24 hours. How well are we doing that? We track our CI/CD metrics like test suite execution times, build times. We also track developer happiness. We have a quarterly survey sent out called Culture Amp. It's kind of like employee NPS. We track those as well. And so by tracking metrics, as a remote manager, it's really handy because it gives you a 10,000 foot view of the organization. It gives you a starting point to where to dive into hotspots or areas that could be bad. The metrics also let you know what you're capable of. If you slip, you can say, hey, we can get our pages this fast because they at least used to be that fast. And it will help you gauge how well you're growing as well. Like ideally, we're running more tests, we're shipping more code, engineering productivity is increasing. So metrics will help you with a lot of high-level decisions and making cases outside the engineering organization as well. All right, so we're at the end. Parting thoughts. We're actually just one parting thought. It's a quote from a popular management author and consultant last century, Peter Drucker. This quote might be apocryphal, but I'm just gonna use it anyways because everyone does. And it's that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So basically you could have the best strategy in the world for your company, but if you have a bad culture, you probably won't execute that well. Whereas if you have just an okay strategy, but a great culture, your team will figure out how to improve that strategy and you'll execute in a good way. So cultures can be defined a bunch of different ways. My favorite definition of culture is what folks do when nobody's looking, but how will they act when no one's looking? Culture is top down and bottom up. It doesn't just happen, you have to be proactive. An analogy that Storyblocks CEO likes to use is to think of yourself as a gardener. So gardeners make sure the soil's right, gets the right amount of water and sunlight, and then they plant the seeds, but the plants themselves are doing the growing. So as a leader, you want to be a good leader as a gardener. You want to make sure that psychological safety is in place. There's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That there's good tooling in place. That things are tested. Just kind of all those tips that I just went through will help you create a good garden, foster a good culture. So yeah, culture eats strategy for breakfast. All right, so that ends my fire hose of tips. Hopefully they're actionable and will help you go back to your organizations and be better managers and have some new arrows in your quiver and whatnot. If you have any questions, feel free to ask now in the chat, or you can even try unmuting yourself. And you can also find me on Twitter, and there's the West Slope Startup Week Slack as well.
Excellent. Thanks, Aaron. I just wanted to say to everybody, the hour is up, but we can go as long as we want to because this is all virtual. So, if you have the time, there's no hurry on our end. And if no one has a question, I definitely have a question. So can I take it, Aaron?
Yeah, feel free to ask the first question.
Okay, excellent. So about halfway through, you were talking a lot about retention and whatnot. In rural America, or let's just say Western Colorado, it's commonly talked about access to the outdoors being this quality of life that can potentially help with retention in teams, at least teams locally. I was curious if you had many thoughts as to how that encouraging outdoor recreation or just general health and well-being plays into the retention factor in your experience.
Yeah, so one of the most important things for retention is to prevent burnout. And burnout can happen if people are just working and not taking time to take care of themselves. One of the best ways to take care of yourself is to get outside and exercise, or get outside and not exercise, even just being outside. In Japan, I heard this is prescribed by doctors. It's called forest bathing. They'll write you a prescription to go outside. And if you can foster a culture that encourages that, you'll benefit. So in order to do that, first you'll need a results-oriented culture. This is something I didn't talk about as much, but you don't want to be evaluating people on FaceTime. It's really just let people's results speak for themselves. And that means that if they want to take a break in the middle of the day and it won't affect their work, they can. So we have employees who will take piano lessons, we have mountain bikers who are training for bike rides. I think we have 2 triathletes at Storyblocks. And so the first thing is they need to feel they can take advantage of the outdoors and go outside without it like hurting their career or coming off as viewed negatively. And then, so once you have a culture that supports it, then it's good to just promote it. So one way we do that is people often, when they're doing like a renewal activity like running, they'll even say it. They'll say like, hey, I'm going for a run. And then people will respond with like Sonic the Hedgehog emojis and whatnot. And then that also communicates like, hey, the senior engineer is going for a run. That means I can too. Like, it's okay. And companies that kind of allow that will help retention, just like you said. And yeah, we have another employee in Ridgeway, Colorado, and he runs like 100-mile races. So he's leaving work and running all the time. And the fact that he's able to do that, I think, is an important part of why he's working at Storyblocks.
Excellent. Thank you. It looks like Olivia has a question here in Slack in the message. It says, what is the hardest obstacle you have faced with remote teams, especially from your neck of the woods?
Yeah. There's so many obstacles. It is like that mountain climbing analogy. You are climbing the mountain with like a prosthetic leg, so it's harder. It's one of the biggest obstacles, I'd say, is kind of being in tune to, I'm not gonna have a better word for this, but like workplace drama. So for example, there was a time at Storyblocks where we wanted to experiment with co-location. So all the engineers were sitting together. And if you read a lot about squad model and Spotify squads, they say, no, you should have people sit together in squads. You should have the product manager, designer, and the engineers working on feature A sit together, and the product manager, designer, and engineers working on feature B sit together. So we said, hey, let's give this a try, A/B test process. These 2 teams will go all sit as a squad. So now we have 6 engineers that are separate from the rest of the engineers. And as a remote person, I have kind of no idea how that's going. Until my one-on-ones, when I ask, like, what's the worst part of your job? And people are saying, well, it kind of stinks to be like separated from all the other engineers. Like, I wish we all sit back together. And so I was like, all right, well, let's just have everyone go sit back together. And people move their desks, and that like then upset a whole lot of other people where they thought, like, how dare you move people without checking with the other team members and stuff. So it can be hard to kind of like understand unofficial dynamics and like dotted line relationships if you're remote. The best way to remedy this is, well, one is to have good relationships through all those one-on-ones. So luckily when that happened, one of the product managers who was really upset with me was like, did you do that as like a power move, or were you just not thinking about it? It was a mistake. And I was like, it was a mistake. And he was like, oh, okay, that's what I thought. And then we moved on, and like that was that. So it's good to have those relationships. The other thing is, yes, kind of stay active in Slack and have a few people who you trust, who are good, who have high EQs and good cultural reads, and just kind of ask them, how are things going with this? Or like, what's the general sentiment with this other thing? And just if you're remote and most of your team isn't, try to have eyes and ears on the ground. And if everyone's remote, then you really got to leverage those one-on-ones to get a sense of how people are doing, and maybe double down on like what's the worst part of your job, and break it into different categories. Like, what's the worst part of your actual job, and like technically, and then what's the worst part of just like your working life right now. Olivia, let me know if you want me to dive in more, or if you have any additional question there. There's always going to be an obstacle or hardest part to remote managing. It's kind of like whack-a-mole. Once you tackle one, something else will come up. But as long as you're proactive and trying things out and experimenting, you can stay on top of it.
This is Justin again. Do you think that remote management is harder, easier, same as in person?
Yeah, like I started off in the beginning, I think it's harder. I think even though I love being remote, and I think remote opens up a whole lot of opportunities, there probably is like a 10% productivity tax by being remote, but it's a tax worth paying. Due to like the retention benefits and recruiting and overhead and whatnot. So being a remote manager just requires, I think, more effort. If I was in the office, I would still have a one-on-one with every single engineers, but I think most in-office managers like don't have a one-on-one with every single person on their team. It's something they think they don't have to do. And they might be right, but when you're remote, I think it is almost mandatory that you got to do these like skip level meetings and really meet with everyone. And so you'll be spending more time in meetings remotely, and kind of more time perusing Slack in the evenings. Sometimes when I'm brushing my teeth, I'll be like scrolling through Slack channels to see if I like missed anything or need to connect any dots. So there's kind of extra homework you have to do as a remote manager to get a lay of the land.
Excellent. Does anybody else have any other questions? Oh, we got another one. Another one from Olivia. How have you diversified your remote teams, and where do you look for diversified talent?
Yeah, so the way you diversify a remote team would be the same as the way you diversify a non-remote team, which is trying really hard and putting a lot of effort into it. Just like most other tech startups, Storyblocks does have like a diversity problem where the population of our programmers does not best represent the population of the country or the world or the DC area. That's why I started engaging with the diversity inclusion coach 2 years ago, was to kind of get additional insights into tackling this. Once again, there's no silver bullet. And diversity itself is a big topic. Like if diversity, you talk about gender diversity, you can talk about race, you can talk about disability, veteran status. There's a lot of below the line diversity as well, socioeconomic, remote or not remote. But in general, what we try to do is expend disproportionate amount of effort to recruit engineers who are not like us. So our team is about 20% women engineers. And so we spend a lot more money on like women job boards, like Hire Tech Ladies. We had a Women Who Code meetup hosted in our office. When screening resumes, we'll cast like a much wider net for underrepresented groups. So it's tempting to like if you see a resume and it's harder to like read or whatever, you have like 100 resumes, you might just keep moving forward. But we'll spend like extra time evaluating resumes and stuff just to make sure that try to minimize false negatives basically. And there's other companies I was at hosted like lunches for underrepresented groups and dinners when they traveled and went recruiting. They did a lot of college recruiting. There's no one tactic, but what does work is once you start getting involved in various communities, we're supporting Women Who Code or Black Girls Code or whatever, you start getting your name out. If you can kind of position yourself as an ally, that will help a lot. So an ally isn't a term that you can declare yourself. It's kind of a term that's bestowed upon you. You have to work to earn that term. And so if you value a remote or diversified team, remote or not, you have to work to kind of earn that title. I'm loving your questions, Olivia. I hope I'm doing an okay job answering them, but feel free to keep asking away or hit me up on the Slack channel. And I do want to say one more thing though, is that companies often over-index on getting diverse candidates in the door. And then when they show up, like they're not supporting, they're not helping. So when you have a diverse team, that you're not done when they sign that offer. You got to really make sure that your workplace is inclusive and equitable. And often engineers, especially like those in underrepresented groups, they're usually over-mentored, like under-coached and sponsored. So mentorship, coaching, training is important. Making sure that you're trying to name drop and give equal opportunities. You have to spend as much energy once they're in the door as you are trying to get them to sign in the first place. So diversity is not just a recruiting problem. It's also a like retention and company problem.
That's excellent. Well, it's 10 after, and I think the last call for questions. All right, I think we're good. I just want to thank you once again, Aaron. This is great. There's a lot of information in here that I hope others can take. I know I can take to my job. So, so thanks a bunch. Seriously.
All right. I hope you all got some new tools in your toolbox and can go out and experiment with using them. Thanks, everyone.